This conference will now be recorded.
So again, good morning. My name is Gail Henriksen. I'm the Community Development Director for Clatsop County, and today is our third and final town hall meeting to talk about possible revisions to the county's short-term rental ordinances. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we have Commissioner Thompson with us here today, and I wanted to offer her the opportunity to say a few words if she'd like.
I would like, thank you, Community Development Director Henriksen. In a way, we're engaged in the same business. You have a better title, I think, for that than I do, perhaps. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I appreciate your time, your interest, your heart, and your best thinking on this. I wanted to set a context this morning. I wanted to talk first about five elements, for me, foundational pieces as we proceed. I mentioned these at the meeting of the Planning Commission and the County Board of Commissioners earlier this week, so they may be familiar to some. I think they're good enough to go forward with, so I'd ask you to take a moment to hear me. Number one of the five, rules. Number two, roles. Number three, responsibilities. Number four, relationships. Number five, resources. By rules, I mean the laws that underpin whatever activity we're engaged in. County commissioners take an oath of office. That's the law I take very seriously. Number two, the roles. What title do we have? Number three, the responsibilities. Which tasks do we execute in performance of our roles? Guided by the rules, determined by the rules. And what are the conditions of satisfactions for performing those responsibilities? Number four, and this is a critical piece of this, the relationships. I've talked often about our being good neighbors together, that for me is the essential foundational piece, not adversaries, not superior to subordinate, no demonizing, no shaming, no blaming, just good neighbor relationships. And number five, what resources do we bring to bear? What money do we have and what elements of social capital do we have? So again, those are my five contextual pieces: rules, roles, relationships, responsibilities, and resources. And since I heard some things in recent testimony to the Board of County Commissioners, I want to reiterate, I think someone needs to mute their phone or their device, please. Recent testimony to the Board of County Commissioners, something I stated previously, I don't think registered, so I want to try again. Examples of how to deal with short-term rentals often referred to what cities do. If we, neighbors, if we want to be a city, we neighbors need to take steps to research that option. Trying to force Clatsop County to act as a city does isn't workable. Lincoln County, they're currently involved in litigation about the short-term issue there. So in terms of a successful county, Lincoln County isn't there yet. So there are three legal options that come to mind. Number one, a municipal entity composed of Arch Cape, Cove Beach, and Falcon Cove could be geographically about the size of Nehalem, but with more money since our assessed valuation is higher. Or number two, we could look at a special district. Number three, we could look at an HOA. All of these are options that refer back to the number one element. What rules do we operate under? So neighbors, thanks for being here and thanks for listening to me set a context for us this morning. Thank you, Director Henriksen.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we'll go ahead and move into our meeting. Just before we do, quick outline what we're going to be doing today. We'll go over just a few GoToMeeting basics for anyone who may not be familiar with this platform. I'll do a brief overview of where we've been in the past and where we are now. Then we're going to do some discussion about our good neighbor standards, the requirements of the local representative, the neighborhood notification requirements, And where I would prefer to spend the bulk of our time today is to talk about the different zoning licensing options. And when we get to that point, I know that Nancy Chase has proposed an option 7. There are infinite varieties of options available, but that's where I would prefer that we spend our time discussing, just to see if we can find any type of middle ground that we can work with. So moving on, GoToMeeting, if you're not familiar with this platform, it's a little bit different than Zoom. We do not have a raise hand function. So questions can be put into the chat box, which is this little yellow speech balloon circled in yellow up here. I'll also be watching to see if people come off mute or raise their hands, and make sure that we can hear from everyone. I would ask that if you're not speaking, that you do keep your mic on mute. And down here, circled in green, you'll see the little microphone with the line through it. That means you're muted. You just need to click that to come off mute. If you're on the phone call, you can use *6 to mute and unmute yourself as well. And just keeping ourselves on mute when we're not talking just helps everybody hear better, cuts down on the interference, and just makes for a better meeting. So thank you. Just a brief background, we have been working on this process for a really, really, really long time, 500 coronavirus years, I think. But we started back more formally back in February of 2021, so a year ago. We had some work sessions with the board, and in June, the board gave us staff the direction to move forward with a moratorium, which the board approved on August 25th. They extended that moratorium on December 8th, and so it is currently in effect through April 28th of this year. To date, we've had 2 town hall meetings so far. The first one was September 24th. The second one was a date in November, which was actually November 12th, and today is our 3rd and final town hall hearing. All right, so moving into the meat of the meeting today, the first issue to talk about is the good neighbor standards. And all of the comments that I've received so far are posted on the county's website, and I've responded to you with a link to those. But Nancy Weil did send in some comments about the good neighbor standards. The one that is proposed in the draft that's on the website that was in the email I sent you all is basically on Tillamook counties, and is basically there to be a reminder to the renters that they are in a residential neighborhood and that they should be mindful of their P's and Q's basically and understand what the rules and regulations are. So I don't see that there's fiscal cost really associated with this. Obviously there would be photocopying cost, but it's a pretty minimal cost, and it would be all on the renters to abide by that. So I'm going to pause there, see if we have questions and comments about the draft of the Good Neighbor policy. Is anybody opposed to a Good Neighbor policy? John Meyer, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I think it's an excellent suggestion, and in the Falcon Cove, Cove Beach area, we have for the last 2 years had a good neighbor policy, which has been very effective and very helpful, and has also helped bring the community of short-term rental owners together. So I think it's an excellent suggestion.
Thank you, John. Does anybody else have any thoughts or comments about this? I mean, the language can be tweaked and revised, but in general, the concept, everyone is okay with it. I'm going to take that as a yes and move to our next slide. So the next topic works with the local agent representative requirement, and all of the ordinances that we reviewed as part of our survey during this process, that's Cannon Beach, Gerhardt, Lincoln County, Manzanita, and Seaside, all of them have some sort of requirement for a local contact, because we do know that many short-term rentals obviously are not owner occupied, and many times the owner is outside of the county, possibly outside of the state. And even our current ordinances, not the Arch Cape one, but the other one, have a requirement for a local contact, someone who can be there to handle complaints or deal with emergency type of situations. Our current requirements state that your local contact has to be available by phone within 20 minutes or in person of receiving 20 minutes of receiving any complaint. And what the proposed, doesn't mean it's set in stone, but is currently proposed right at this very moment in time, is that the local contact should be available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And that may mean you may have to have more than one contact, obviously, because none of us are going to be up 24/7 monitoring our phones or our emails. With regard to the time, we would recommend that physically you be able to respond within 30 minutes. We've heard comments back from people who say that's really not realistic because some areas of the county are very geographically isolated. And there's oftentimes in the summer, there will be traffic congestion, there may be accidents on the roadway, there may be landslides or other types of natural disasters or just weather that may prevent someone from responding within 30 minutes. We've had some recommendations that we have people just respond in a timely manner. And I will explain that the reason staff is proposing some sort of definitive limit on that is because we do need a way to quantify that. I mean, part of the reason we experience such confusion and frustration with our ordinance is that we do have non-quantifiable provisions in our code. And so, 30 minutes is a starting point for discussion, but I think there needs to be some, enforceable thing, obviously realizing that on a case-by-case basis, if the roads are icy, we have to realize that people will not make it in whatever period of time that we set. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pause for questions. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand. I do not see anyone coming off mute, but I do know that I've received written comments about this. So does anybody want to talk about that? Nancy Chase.
Thank you. First of all, I've only had one complaint, and it was based on the fact that the person thought I only had one bedroom, and it was over occupancy. And it wasn't, because I have 2 bedrooms. So there's really no need to contact the renter. And I'm thinking there are lots of cases that aren't related to the renter where you may have a complaint. Another complaint was maybe that notice hadn't been given properly on my license. And again, that's not involving having to get a hold of a renter within the 30 minutes. The call I received from the hotline was from an unknown number. I'm hearing public service announcements all the time, like, don't answer. If you don't recognize the number, don't answer it. So it was just lucky I picked it up. So I would ask that, we be given the list of phone numbers that the hotline might use, so we were able to identify it quickly. And then on the outdoor sign, I guess unless someone who's got a complaint trespasses, like you could put a sign in the window or the door, but they're going to have to walk up to it, giving the owner name or whoever the contact person is. Otherwise, you're looking at something larger that's going to be visible from walking by on the street. And I think that's going to not be very pleasant to have in a residential area, to have all these signs up. So I don't know if there's something on your website that you could provide contact information by address so that folks aren't going to have to go up to the door to get it, or have a large sign. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And the county is working on putting a list together like that. I know Cannon Beach posts on their website, and I believe the city of Gearhart does as well. So we will be doing that regardless of any additional requirements. I'm going to go next to Jonathan Felix Lund, but before I do that, Chris DeLong had a comment in chat asking for some clarification about unincorporated Astoria. And the Ordinance 1904, which is the top one that's on the slide, that covers all of unincorporated Clatsop County except for Arch Cape. So that's the answer to that question. And I hope that answered your question, Chris. Jonathan, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, can you hear me?
So the proposal.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks, Gail. Yeah, I want to speak to this because I think it's a tricky issue. I think the concept makes great sense that there should be someone there to deal with any in-person issues that come up. And I think having something quantifiable really makes sense in terms of being able to understand how do you enforce some of these issues. And that's been one of the biggest complaints in terms of, you know, the challenge in enforcing and being able to actually identify like where the issues are and how they can get better. The problem I see is actually designing language here that can't be abused very easily. And I say that coming from a perspective where I have at least 5 complaints against my property that are verifiably false. And while I don't think most people would go about, you know, putting in false complaints, it's such low cost to put in a complaint, and it can be such a high cost to have to be under this time frame to respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week within 30 minutes. And so I think that I'm also curious. It's like we're here because it's a reasonable idea, but I don't necessarily know that we've proven within the complaints that this has actually been a really big issue. Like we haven't had violations that are safety issues. These are really kind of complaints of preference. They're complaints of maybe there's too much trash, or maybe there's over occupancy or something along those lines. And so while I think that there should be a way to address those, I feel like there needs to be either some kind of tiering system to understand the severity of these, and also apply that severity to the response. And like you mentioned, you know, like where my home is at, like there's no cell service. So if you're under Wi-Fi, you can call people, but if you go outside of the house, there's not cell service, and you have to go down to the beach. So, you know, there are definitely some kind of structural challenges to being able to do this. And I'm all for having, you know, real clear standards. I worry that this could be abused. You could call in anonymously. You could call in 10 times a day anonymously if you wanted to. And well, I really hope people won't do that, but they sure can. And so I think so long as we have, you know, complaints that are not anonymous, and that if you miss the 30-minute mark, but there's no evidence to say that there was an issue, like maybe there's some really loud partying, some really terrible guests, and someone can't show up in 30 minutes, to me, that's a clear violation, right? But if someone complains that there's noise and then someone shows up, and maybe they're 40 minutes late, but there's no noise, there's no proof of that, there's nothing to do to verify that. I think we need to put real structure around this so that this policy doesn't end up being a potential policy that can be abused either, you know, in the next 6 months or in the next 5 years. So that's my main complaint, and I speak to it out of experience because I have evidence, very clear evidence showing false complaints and people submitting basically lies to the county as I've looked through all of it. And so I just want to put that out there for everyone to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next, we'll hear from Denise Davis, and she'll be followed by Rob Chambers.
Hi, Gail. This obviously isn't Denise, it's Jeff. Thanks. We just wanted to underscore the importance of something like this, because one of our arguments about, or one of our concerns about STRs is that basically they're mini hotels without a manager on site, and any other lodging commercial interest has managers basically. And so there has to be some kind of recourse for this. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Rob Chambers.
Thank you. I wanted to say a couple things. First is I agree with Nancy Chase about known originating phone numbers from the complaint hotline. That needs to be absolutely covered due to the high incidence of spam calls we all receive now. Additionally, I wanted to agree with Jonathan Felix Lund on it is going to be low cost to complain, but a high cost to respond. I'm 100% for having a response. I think that's totally reasonable. But what I'm concerned about is the same thing. It's it's easy for other people to complain when there aren't actually complaints. And I think the list of complaints that we've all seen, most of them turn out to be non-issues, and there needs to be some sort of option for covering the costs by the covering those costs. The additional thing is, in addition to phone number notification, I'd suggest that we update to modern technology and use things like SMS and email and other systems, not just telephones. I think all STR owners are much more likely to be able to be responsive with SMS or email systems than telephones. That's how everything works today. But I am definitely in support of having some sort of quantifiable, accountable systems to deal with these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Elise Shoop put in the chat box that the contact number needs to be visibly posted on the outside of the house. This is a safety issue. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments about that?
I do.
Okay, Charles?
Yeah, so I do believe, since these are for-profit businesses, that they should have a sign out front that is visible and readable from the street, so people don't have to trespass, that identifies, that that's a business, and identifies a contact number that people can call if there is something amiss with what's going on. And while I'm on, I'm also going to make a comment about the notice time. I think the notice time, I think 30 minutes is just fine. If people are going to conduct a business, there's a cost of doing business, and they'll just have to make arrangements with property management companies. There's certainly some in Arch Cape. There's some in Cannon Beach. So it's not an impossible thing to do. And I'd also like to suggest that many of the issues that we have seen in our neighborhood of Cove Beach that have popped up are transitory in nature. So we've seen people in our roads down here. Many of the roads are only wide enough for one car, and we've had several instances where people have parked in the middle of the road and left their car there. And those have been reported. And of course, by the time the county gets down here to try and verify something, obviously the car is long gone. And the same thing with noise. I mean, noise can occur, and by the time somebody from the county gets down here, a day later, of course, the noise is gone. I mean, this is pragmatic. Everybody knows this is the case. So my suggestion would be that if the complaining party submits photographic or video documentation of these events, that they be a priori logged as a verified event by the county in the contact system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charles.
Gail, can I make one comment on that just really briefly?
Sure.
So I just want everyone to kind of understand, maybe just from a firsthand account. I had someone send in a complaint that had a picture of a car in the road. So I totally understand, like, we don't want safety issues. We don't want people blocking the road. But I had a complaint sent in that shows a car and it's kind of tilted towards my driveway. And they sent in a complaint saying that this car has been parked in the middle of the road and that it's a safety issue. It's a fire hazard, and it happens all the time. And what irresponsible owners that live, outside of the area. And I have cameras outside of my house, which is unfortunate that I even have to do this. But the car was literally parked, was literally there for like 30 seconds. And then they were moving into the driveway. And so some of these issues, they're being exaggerated in such a huge way. And it's also just a really dishonest in some of the ways that these are reported. I see the same thing happening while I'm out there with full-time residents, with all kinds of people. So we need education, we need great solutions, but we also have an issue where we're taking these tiny things that have not actually resulted in any safety issues, and then we're trying to kind of get after our neighbors on them. So I think we need to be more honest about this, and we need to make sure that these policies are actually put in place in a way that can't be abused. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to go next to Dennis McVicker, then Ned Dobner, and I think David, whoever's marked as David Cleland, also wanted to speak. So you'll be third. Okay, so we'll go to Dennis McVicker next.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
All right. Well, thank you. I just have my own little story to share that we had people parked properly in our driveway. One car pulled out into the area in front of our house to let another car pull out. Maybe it was there for a minute, pulled back in. But while they were there, a complaint was filed that I was parking incorrectly. So that does happen. The other comment I wanted to make, we had, I'm in Arch Cape, and in 4 years, we've had 9 complaints in Arch Cape. 3 of them are for no permit for the person renting. 3 of them were for COVID violations. All 6 of those are owner issues. They're not renter issues. So none of those are issues that would be resolved by anything that we're talking about. None of those issues are issues that someone would need to go to the home. The other 3 actually were on me. All parking issues, and none of them were in violation of any of the county codes. I was having a particular little beef with my neighbor. Of those 3, 1 was identified as not a violation, 1 was identified as not able to verify. And we have done a lot to satisfy our neighbor. So if I just look at Arch Cape in 4 years, 9 issues that nothing that we are talking about will actually deal with. So one thing that I would like to, 2 things I'd like to suggest. One is that we look at this data, these 73 complaints, and we actually go through, well, one of them is for a campground. It's not even an STR. And I would kind of like to see, and I hope the commissioners would be able to see, a sorting of these complaints to first get rid of anything that's not an STR, but then also sort them out so we can see what are real violations and what those violations are, so that we know that we're actually dealing with the issues that people are complaining about. We're actually dealing with the issues where we have violations of the codes. And I am concerned that we may be putting a lot in place that that might be way more than is needed to deal with the actual issues, and might even be missing the actual issues that that we need to be dealing with. So again, I would encourage that these 73 complaints be sorted through, and that real data from them, analysis of that data, be presented to both us and to the commissioners on what the issues are. Finally, the issue of having someone available within 30 minutes. You know, I've owned a vacation rental in Arch Cape for, I think, 7 years. I have one in Maui as well that I've had for 3 or 4 years. And I've literally never had to send someone to my rental because of either a violation or even a complaint to me from my renter. And so though it sounds good to have someone available within 30 minutes, I don't know that is really a data-driven need. I will admit it's a burden. It's a burden and I have to be prepared to do that in Maui. That is a requirement to have an on-site person available. I don't think the 30 minutes is required, but it is required that I have a rep on site, and it is a burden, and a burden that cost me money that I've never used. I've never had to use. So especially with this, I would again want to look at the actual complaints that we get and the violations, and identify how many of these is it actually needed to have someone on site. And I've again never had to go on site to deal with any of my issues. I've had a customer complain to me personally, which is great, that there's too much noise. And I understand I've got 20 minutes to call my tenant and get them to shut the noise down. And that's been effective. Again, I've never had someone needed to go on site. So I would hope that these decisions are data driven, and we've got 73 data points to work with. Let's look at those data points and see if these things are really needed. Now this is my final. It's working in Archgate. Nine complaints in 4 years. None of those complaints are going to change with any of these regulations. So I would encourage us, leave Archcape alone. What we've got in Archcape is working. And secondly, maybe if we just applied what's working in Archcape to the rest of the county, maybe it would work in the rest of the county as well. I think what we're doing is a little bit more than the data drives us to do. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Dennis. And to let everyone know, we did pull the complaints for our first town hall meeting back in September and identified what the complaints were. Also, if you look on the calendar item on the county's webpage for today's meeting, an updated complaint matrix has been posted that does break down the complaints that we've received since January 1st, 2018 through, I think, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and then does put the resolution on there, whether or not we were able to substantiate the complaints, and if we were, what the action taken was. So that information is available. So next we'll go to Ned Dobner and then David Cleland, and I see lots of other people who want to speak, so we'll get to you as well. So Ned?
Hi, Gail. Thank you. And thank you for all your efforts in putting together these meetings. I work with Vacasa and have done so for the past 6 years rather, with owners on the North Oregon coast. And we're certainly sensitive to these issues of compliance and responsiveness. And I just wanted to mention a few things that Vacasa as an organization does with our owners. One is that we have a rental agreement that each guest must review and approve that talks about no parties, not exceeding the occupancy limit of the home, no noise from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. And we also screen for any indications that people may be wanting to do something different. If somebody around spring break or Hood to Coast has a .edu extension, that warrants further investigation because we have zero interest in having party houses. They're going to be a problem for neighbors. Also, we're available 24/7, 365 with our response center. So these are people that are well trained. They're based here in the United States. It's not farmed off to some other place. And we also have compliance to meet the response standards. So there's always, in addition to being able to call any time of night or day, a live person that's going to be able to respond within that 30-minute time frame if needed. We always have weekly garbage service, and we're sensitive to not having a problem for neighbors with that. And lastly, in the next 12 months, we're going to be installing in all of our properties at no cost to the owners a noise monitoring wall plate in the home. It measures sound decibels, and if it goes over a certain limit, it will trigger a call. And if the guests are being too loud and they don't quiet down, we will come and tell them that they need to leave because they're in violation of the rental agreement. So I just wanted to mention some of these things, and we're sensitive to these issues about being a good neighbor and having steps in place. They're going to see that this is an experience that is good for guests as well as for their neighbors. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ned. Next, we'll go to David Cleland.
This is Joanne Cornelius on David Cleland's computer. We're talking about spending all this time talking about what businesses are doing, wonderful things that they're doing. And I'm only talking about Cove Beach. Actually, also self-employed is involved in this. It's just commercial businesses that are going on. This is illegal. We are a coastal residential area with no commercial activities supposedly, but yet here we are.
Joanne, you're going in and out, and we're not hearing you very well.
Talking about business. I would like to talk about the residents. Can you hear?
Yeah, we really can't hear you now at all.
I don't understand why. My microphone.
Okay. Can I come back to you in just a moment, Joanne, while you work on that?
Well, I'll see if I can figure it out. Thanks. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to go to Lisa Payne next, and then we will go to Nancy Chase.
Hi there, I'm Lisa Payne, and I also work with Vacasa, and I am the general manager on the North Oregon coast. And I just wanted to call out, thank you, Ned, for chiming in on Vacasa's behalf. I deal with these complaints directly, and I take them very seriously. We certainly want to be good neighbors, and some of the most common things that we get calls about are, lights left on, noise, parking, garbage spread out, those kinds of things. And we certainly do, talk to guests on the phone, we text them any way we can, but we also do show up in person when needed. So, we take that very seriously. We do want to be good neighbors. The one thing in each of these cities, we do deal with different time restrictions on responding in person. City of Seaside, it's an hour. Manzanita, it's 20 minutes. There's different guidelines, but those are much more condensed areas. And with, Clatsop, unincorporated Clatsop County, it does make it a little bit more challenging to respond in 30 minutes, especially in the summertime when it's bottlenecked and you can't move a mile in 15 minutes. So I know that there's going to be circumstances, the way I'm reading the guidelines, for that response time that might, give someone a little extra time. But if it's a hard line in a policy or, a requirement, I know that the neighbors are going to have that expectation of us responding in 30 minutes. So I personally feel like it should be a little bit longer. I have staff that are in each of these cities that surround all these areas in Gearhart, Manzanita, Cannon Beach. But like I said, it can take longer to get there. And they also have to have, 5 minutes to stop what they're doing, collect their things, and then get out on the road. So I feel like maybe more of a 45-minute or an hour or something like that. I think 30 minutes is going to be really pushing it to actually be able to respond to these. But I do agree that responding over the phone initially within that shorter time frame makes complete sense. And from what I understand, Gail, how I'm reading this, it's the proposal is stating that essentially these neighbors would be calling the local agent directly. Is that correct?
Yes, our current ordinance, and we're not proposing any changes to that, but both ordinances do require the first step to be to contact that local agent. And then if you don't get a satisfactory response, then your next step, you can follow up with county code compliance. We do have now the short-term rental hotline, so that is also an option. And what the hotline does is you call there, they contact the local agent for you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we're familiar with all these different, I deal with a number of them, and they all have their different nuances and reasons for doing things. And we completely understand the neighbors being frustrated with some of the things that guests do because it's human nature. And, unfortunately, some of them make bad choices, and we do want to respond and take the responsibility in making sure they're doing what they need to do, but with the proper guidelines and, research into it. I hear what some of the other agents are saying, and I agree that the system can be abused. I would say for me personally, the majority of the time it's not. There are valid complaints with parking and things, and we do take that seriously. But I just wanted to share that about the response time to make sure it is fair on all sides, but that we are also meeting the needs of the neighbors. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Next, we'll go to Nancy Chase, followed by John Meyer.
Thank you, Gail. I just want to respond to the roads situation in Cove Beach. And I like our narrow gravel roads, but we do have a much larger right-of-way that could be improved, and I would not want to see that. But someone can be parallel parking on my lawn and be in the right of way. And what I see, and so I'm not, and you still have passage back and forth on the gravel street. And normally when someone's doing that, it's a contractor or a short-term visitor who just don't want to block the driveway in case someone has to get out. But I don't think anyone should be blocking the street for access, and that's kind of a fire and safety. And that's for any resident, whether they're a part-time owner or a renter or a short-term rental owner, or their visitors. So to me, that blocking access in a public street is not a short-term rental issue. It's more someone who should be towed if they're there long-term, or it's a fire department that comes down to work on that. So I don't know if that makes logic to you, but to me, it's just not a short-term rental visitor problem. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to John and then Charles Dice.
Gail, thank you. I want to first say that I support many of the comments that have been made about the problems associated with a complicated or unnecessarily restrictive complaint policy and enforcement. We've been renting for 5 years and had one complaint. I was happy to take a call. A guest had come down from Cannon Beach to visit his family and was parked in the right of way. It took 5 minutes of my time to get the problem fixed. But what I also want to point out was that the county, as a result of that complaint, came down and did an inspection and took pictures and filled out these forms. And I noticed that it took 5 hours of county time. And somewhere in this system, I think there needs to be some sensitivity or understanding of overworking something, leading to a tremendous amount of staff time. And I also want to point out that my sense is this complaint policies that we've got have been one of the primary sources of disharmony in our community. And it's been used by people who are obviously opposed to short-term rentals. So we've got to come up with a system here that does not allow abuses in the system, because if there's a vehicle for abuses, it's going to be used to promote an agenda. And I hope that that's why I was intrigued by the Cannon Beach formula, which is to respond in a timely manner. I'm happy to get a complaint from a neighbor if there's something going on that needs to be fixed. I really appreciate that. So I just want to leave those comments with you.
Thank you, John. Charles, and then back to Joanne Cornelius.
Yeah, actually, I didn't have my hand raised, but I do feel an obligation to point out in this discussion that many of the complaints, if you will, are from people who live here. We live in a residential community, and we want to live in a residential community. We don't really want to live in a commercial business hotel community. I mean, if we wanted that, we would have probably bought somewhere else. But the complaints you're hearing are from the people that have to put up with them. And we have to put up with them whenever they occur, at whatever time of day or night they occur. And we have to take the time and effort to go make a complaint on a hotline, or find the number, walk outside, go get the number off of the placard on the place next door, and try to call their agent, who may or may not answer. So our lives have been disrupted for the people that live here, that live in the community. And I'd really like to ask the people on the call to try to put yourself in the shoes of the people who live here, because we do live here and we chose to live here. And it's really, really disruptive. And then when we do complain, we get into the blame the victim trap, where all of a sudden, we have to prove that those people were making noise or that that person was in that driveway for 30 minutes. I have to tell you, it's quite frustrating for those of us that live here. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Joanne?
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better, yeah.
Well, maybe I'll get a little closer, but I don't need to speak. Charles explained very clearly what is going on. These are businesses being run from somewhere else, and we're a rural community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. Okay, I had one question from Dr. Claire Hasler-Lewis, who asked whether, in this particular case, Surf Pines, which is a gated HOA within Clatsop County, could establish its own rules and regulations regarding short-term rentals. And the answer to that is yes. The county rule is there, but if there is an established HOA that wants to prohibit short-term rentals within their boundaries, then they have the ability to do that. And then it will be up on them to enforce that requirement. So the county will not enforce your private HOA covenants and restrictions, but you do have the ability to do that. Okay, I don't want to cut off discussion on this topic. I see Reba, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I have a cabin at Falcon Cove Beach that is used by the family, so we're not living there all the time, but we're there quite a bit. I'm very discouraged that we have spent all these months, all this time, all this testimony, all these rules to discuss properties that are violations of the legal zoning. I'm a realtor. I deal with zoning issues all the time. It's very discouraging to me to go to the meeting and hear the same things, all this to do over violations of the legal zoning. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Reba. And that sort of gives us a segue to move forward. Again, I don't want to cut off discussion if people have more to say about the local agent requirement. What I think that I have understood is that generally, with maybe one or two exceptions, there's not opposition to having a local agent. There are concerns about the timeframes associated with the response. And I think that's what I've understood. So if I've misunderstood anything, please tell me now before I move on so we can get to the meaty stuff of the meeting. So, all right. Joanne, I'm not hearing you. I'm sorry.
You're right.
Okay, thank you. All right. So with that affirmation, we're going to move on very quickly. Neighborhood notification. We, as Clatsop County, have a 300-foot requirement for neighborhood notification. It exceeds any of the survey jurisdictions that we looked at. We are not recommending any changes to that 300-foot requirement, and that's a notice that the county sends out. Does anyone have any comments about keeping or not keeping or revising the 300-foot notification requirement? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. And so this is really the biggest part of the meeting. And I think the thing that everybody wants to talk about, and I don't know that, I do know. I know that we will not reach agreement today. I would be very surprised. It would be a Christmas miracle in January, and I would relish it, but I don't think it'll happen. We looked at all the different jurisdictions, again, Cannon Beach, Gerhardt, Seaside, Manzanita, and Lincoln County, to see how they handle short-term rentals, whether it's just a strictly business license procedure, whether it's incorporated into certain zoning districts in their zoning code. And so we put this together. Right now, in our zoning code, only Arch Cape has short-term rentals called out as a permitted use, and it's a type 1 use. So it means it's an over-the-counter permit. There are no public notification requirements. There is no public hearing. Everywhere else in the county, it's strictly a licensing procedure, and it is not addressed in the zoning code for any other district outside of Arch Cape. Cannon Beach does not call it out in their zoning code per se, but in their licensing requirements, they do have restrictions on which zoning designations that short-term rentals are allowed and where they are not allowed. Same thing with Gearhart. They do not specifically address it in zoning code, but they do have districts where it is prohibited and where it is allowed. Lincoln County, which now, as Commissioner Thompson mentioned, has had a voter referendum that has basically put them in a moratorium at this point. They did not previously address short-term rentals at all in their zoning code. With the temporary moratorium that's in place there now, they have 3 residential zones where short-term rentals are currently prohibited. Manzanita does address short-term rentals in their zoning code and allows them, again, as a permitted use, which means no public notice, no public hearing. And then Seaside has a much more complex ordinance. They allow them in certain zoning districts. They are all conditional uses, which means at a minimum there is a public notice sent out to property owners within 250 feet. But not necessarily a public hearing unless the application trips certain thresholds. So theirs is probably the most complex of the ordinances that we looked at. So thinking about the various options, staff put together 6 options. And I know that, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, there are probably an infinite variety of things that we could look at. Nancy Chase, as I also stated earlier, has provided some written comments about an option 7, which would be to adopt one ordinance for the entire unincorporated area and not have any limitations on minimum stays. And I think there might have been one other thing. So I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to work on the assumption that people have read through the presentation slides and has looked at the 6 options staff has presented. What I would like to do is just open it up and let people discuss what their concerns are about any of the options staff has presented. If you have a new option that you would like to present, and just have a discussion. We're going to be taking these options to the Board of Commissioners for a work session on January 26th, which is next week, and presenting the same information to them to get their input as well. So I really just want to be here to listen today, so I'm going to shut up, and the first person I see who has their mic off is Charles Dice, so we'll go with Charles.
Thanks, Gail. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read from my testimony, which thank you for posting, Gail. So it's posted up there and also has been sent to all the commissioners. So on my own behalf and on behalf of the members of the North Coast Neighbors for Neighborhood Group, I'd like to make the following comments to the presentation today. So number 1, with respect to the 6 proposed options for consideration by the Board of Commissioners, the most obvious and straightforward option seems to be glaringly absent. The most logical and easiest option is to follow in the footsteps of many of the other jurisdictions in Clatsop County and many other cities and counties in the state of Oregon, including the city of Astoria, the city of Warrenton, the city of Gearhart, the city of Cannon Beach, Lincoln County, and many others who have actually listened to their citizens and who have enacted sensible legal ordinances to address the needs of their citizens and residents. The key ingredients that have been adopted by the ethical and thoughtful leaders in each of these communities includes several common themes and facts. The first is that SDRs are in fact commercial businesses. This is a fact. Clatsop County recognizes SDRs as a business because they issue a business license to these businesses, a short-term rental permit, using specific business rules in the county business code. Clatsop County assesses these businesses a business tax called a transient occupancy tax. These business licenses are subject to periodic renewal for a recurring business license fee. Again, this is a fact. This fact is stated in many of the existing legal established ordinances in Astoria, Warrenton, Gearhart, and Lincoln County. Number 2, the backbone of any city county or city is the residents or citizens of the county or city. Without these residents, there is no need for a city or county government. In every city or county, the residents are to be found in various neighborhoods. This is a well-established common pattern of social structure in the US today. Most counties and cities recognize this and understand the importance of such residential neighborhoods for their citizens as safe, protected areas for families to live and to raise their children in a safe, comfortable, cohesive neighborhood. You cannot have a neighborhood without neighbors. An STR is not a neighbor. In fact, an STR is the exact opposite of a neighbor. An STR is a property that has the same characteristics as a small hotel or motel. It is a building that is offered to any and all customers who can afford to pay the high rental fees to use the building for temporary occupancy, thereby generating a profit for the building owner. This use brings a daily stream of total strangers into a residential neighborhood from all over the world and deprives the residents in the neighborhood of the ability to have a real stable residential neighbor. By Clatsop County's own definitions, the customers in this building are transient occupants. They are not residents. And you can go look at Ordinance 21-203 in Lincoln County, which was passed by the voters in November and is now the law in Lincoln County. Yes, I'm sure the STR industry is certainly throwing lots of challenges at it, as you might expect for somebody that has a lot of money to lose, but it is the law. And they have excellent wording in that Ordinance 21-203. Number 3, there are certain specific residential neighborhoods where STRs are not appropriate. Here again, each of the above noted cities or counties have spelled out in their own ordinance these specific areas or zones. In Clatsop County, this would certainly include at least the coastal residential zone where vacation rentals are not a permitted use. There are other areas or zones where STRs are or might be welcome, such as in area zoned for commercial use. There may be yet other areas where some limited number of STRs might be appropriate, such as Arch Cape, where STRs are a permitted use. To attempt to apply a single solution across a wide diversity of areas or neighborhoods is neither responsive to the needs of the citizen, nor ethical nor practical, which is why each of the above noted cities or counties have identified areas or zones in their respective ordinances. Point 4, for those specific areas where STRs are appropriate, these existing legal ordinances noted above provide for a number of sensible restrictions and or rules that these commercial businesses must abide by for the safety and security of the other nearby residents, including parking rules such as no on-street parking allowed, noise nuisance rules, strict septic rules for STRs that use septic systems, including prohibiting the use of cesspools or holding tanks, prohibiting STRs where pressurized systems are used, and limiting STR occupancy to the design capacity of the septic system as determined by DEQ per their approved documents. This is a public health and safety issue. A short response time by property owner to complaints and a meaningful public tracking system to track complaints and the resolution of the complaint. And last, meaningful penalties for violation of these rules, including suspension or revocation of the STR permit. So those are some of the common themes in all of these other ordinances that are really low-hanging fruit for the Board of Commissioners to simply adopt the ones that everybody else has agreed on and used and that are legal and that exist for both cities and counties. We are extremely disappointed that the county has ignored the concerns and comments from many, many residents over the past year or more. Our group has submitted over 30 emails and or letters that have gone without recognition or comment by the county. We have submitted a very fact-based letter of protest regarding STRs signed by over 75 property owners in January of 2021 that has again gone unrecognized and without response from the county. The town hall presentations from the county have made it clear that the county is not interested in the needs of its own citizens. It appears to us that the county only cares about the potential revenue stream that might be gained from blanketing the county with STRs and in not offending the various special interest groups that have mounted a campaign to convince or perhaps scare the county into favoring the commercial business interests of business investors who live outside the county and in many cases outside the state of Oregon. Next and last, we request that the county development director include an option that incorporates the above noted common themes from the existing STR ordinances for the city of Astoria, the city of Warrenton, the city of Gerhardt, and Lincoln County, Ordinance 21-203. We request that the county acknowledge the many concerns expressed by a large number of property owners in Falcon Cove Beach and recognize the harm and destruction that has been done to our community by the county issuing short-term rental permits in violation of their own code and without any discussion or notification to the residents of our community. Request that the county engage in an open, transparent, two-way discussion of these concerns, as has been done in other communities noted above, and as is required by Goal 1 of Oregon's Land Use Ordinance. And finally, we would suggest that the county commissioners look very closely at what recently happened in Lincoln County. In Lincoln County, residents in several residential neighborhoods protested the large and rapid growth of STRs in their neighborhood to their county commissioners. The county commissioners ignored these protests over at least 2 years. Eventually, these neighborhoods got together to form a grassroots organization called 15 Neighborhoods. This organization also tried to persuade the county commissioners to take action to stop these STRs, but got no meaningful response. After 2 years, the organization took action on their own to develop a proposed STR ordinance and took this ordinance directly to the voters of Lincoln County using the ballot initiative process. In November of 2021, the voters of Lincoln County overwhelmingly approved this proposed ordinance, thereby taking that decision out of the hands of the commissioners and demonstrating in stark terms how out of touch the commissioners were with their own citizens and how they had failed in their responsibilities and duties. It should also be noted that the out-of-area special interest groups who opposed this ballot initiative spent over $300,000 in a campaign to defeat the initiative versus less than $30,000 spent by 15 Neighborhoods group. Hopefully, this will not have to repeat itself in Clatsop County. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Next, we have Jeff and Denise Davis. And Linda, you had come off mute. Were you waiting to speak? Okay, so we'll have Jeff and Denise Davis followed by Linda Eyerman.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to address the matter of short-term rentals in Clatsop County again. Although we appreciate that you, Gail, and the commissioners and County Manager Bond have organized such a detailed presentation to examine various zoning options for the STR issue, we would like to take a step back to consider why the larger and more important issue of the lawfulness of permitting STRs in a CR zone hasn't been directly addressed. That said, we'd like to offer these comments on the options that you've determined are acceptable solutions. As you can gather from our previous letters and oral comments, we would support option 1 or preferably option 3 for Cove Beach in particular. We reject any one-size-fits-all option. The CR zone of Cove Beach should not be treated the same as Clatsop County's other unincorporated residential zones. And we reject out-of-hand options 4, 5, and 6. We reject any option that changes CR zoning or adds STRs as a permitted use to CR zones to justify commercial activity on the land that has been deemed by experts not to be able to support it. This would include option 7 that I think we'll be hearing about by Nancy Chase. We have to say that the delivery of the first 3 options comes across as incredibly slanted against the residents' well-documented points for removing STRs in our CR zone. A single reference to the benefit of not allowing STRs is tucked away within a preponderance of arguments against removing STRs. Is this a balanced and fair presentation? Still, we'd like to comment on the specific points in the presentation arguing against removing STRs. Potential takings litigation from existing STR owners and operators. Litigation from STR owners has no basis. It's unlawful to operate commercial enterprises in a CR zone. So how can the offender sue the county? What's rather likely and appropriate if the commissioners allow STRs to continue to operate in our CR zone is litigation from residents as communicated to you in previous references to the letters sent to you from 2 land use attorneys. Potential fiscal impact. Others in our community have commented, we just heard from Charles, on the relative fiscal impact to the county. What we wonder is it right for the county to continue to receive the monies it currently collects from unlawful commercial enterprises? We also wonder, will the county pay to have someone clear our roads of downed trees or administer vaccinations and health tests when there aren't enough primary residents to volunteer for these and other critical responsibilities? Impact from day trippers to the beach would not be addressed. Well, that's correct. But this is a totally separate issue. Let's not get sidetracked by it in this particular forum. Day trippers don't generally have the same impact on the community's water and sanitation that STR customers do. They don't usually arrive or party in the middle of the night here, as we've experienced with STR customers. Let's table the day tripper issue for another forum. Would not guarantee that homes are used for long-term rentals or workforce housing. We've got to challenge the logic of this argument. The real argument is that allowing a proliferation of STRs will guarantee that homes will not be as available for long-term rentals or workforce housing. In fact, we've recently learned that 2 different long-term renters in our community were forced out of their homes so that the owners could convert to STRs. Would not guarantee that use of home by owner or owners would not impact quality of life issues. We recall a gentleman at an earlier town hall contesting the idea that transient STR customers impact the quality of life in a neighborhood, noting that he had experienced more trouble from his neighbors who owned their homes. We were really sorry to hear that he lives in a community like that, but that has not been our experience in Cove Beach. What we have seen are the instances of abuse by STR customers, late night noise, trespassing, high volume overnight parking, strewn garbage, septic overflow, etc. These which have been chronicled in early testimony. These abuses are not restricted to our community, but have been reported across the country, leading community leaders to limit STRs or ban them entirely from certain residential areas. County would have fewer enforcement tools if the same complaints are generated by the use of the property by the owner. Again, our experience leads us to expect less need for enforcement with regard to owners. You simply can't make the argument that transient STR occupants have the same regard for the neighborhood as its primary residents do. In short, we expect the commissioners to select option 3 or option 1 for the CR zone of Cove Beach. However, if you persist in ignoring your constituents, we expect at the very least instituting in our neighborhood a cap on the number of STRs as well as enforcing restrictions on the permitted STRs, such as a nightly stay minimum, occupancy limits based on solid health parameters, good neighbor postings that we've discussed earlier this morning. It's imperative to stop or at least curb the increasing high impact STR commercial activity in our neighborhood of Cove Beach, a CR zone. Please do not let the avarice of the STR industry ruin what makes Cove Beach such a pleasure to live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And Linda, if I could ask you to hold for a moment, I got ahead of myself on my list, so I'm going to back up. So next we will hear from Dennis McVicker, followed by Jason Stegner, and then Linda.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
First, I just need to say that my experience is limited to Arch Cape. We bought a home there about 9 years ago on Carnahan. And I was, as we bought a second home for the purpose of short-term rentals, my priority was that I have a home in this community that I go there, especially prior to COVID, probably 130, 140 days a year. I'm not a permanent resident, but I spend a lot of time there. So it was important to me that my rental fit into the community well. I was surprised to find this, again, it was in 2013, that there's 50 homes on Carnahan. Only one of them has a permanent resident. Out of 50 homes, one has a permanent resident. And the others are all people who live elsewhere. The complaints that I personally have received have been from a gentleman that lives in Colorado, comes about 4 times a year for a week at a time. So I guess this is all to say that it is important that, one size doesn't fit all, that I understand I live in a little microcosm, or I own a home and a short-term rental in a little microcosm that probably isn't consistent with the rest of the county, that only 2% of the homes are actual permanent residents. And so I would be concerned about a county-wide law that affects every home the same. Again, Arch Cape has done well. And I also, and Charles made some comments about the full-time residents, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate the impacts on full-time residents. And in my mind, that's why we need to better understand the data and make sure that the decisions that are being made are data-driven, not agenda-driven, whether that agenda is to get rid of STRs or to advance STRs. Let's make sure we make decisions that are data-driven, and even go through the data and I try to identify what the real impact is on the residents. But again, my main thing here is using Carnahan Road as a microcosm. Let's also use it to understand that one size doesn't fit all, and let's make sure we're dealing directly with the issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Next, we'll go to Jason Stegner, followed by Linda Eierman.
Thank you, Gail. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Well, I want to thank you personally for all the work you've done, Gail, and the opportunity to allow us residents and vacation homeowners to speak. As I reflect back on the last 3 years of debate and discussion about short-term rentals in our community, I'm left with the realization that much of what we're talking about is subjective. Topics such as how many rentals, how long can they stay, how do we regulate them, where does the money go in the county? It is all subjective, and we probably will not come to consensus on answers for those topics. But I think it's vitally important that we focus back on what is not subjective. We have all lost sight in the fact that our zone, CR zone, does not specifically allow short-term rentals. And I think it's more important to actually fine-tune what our zone says. Our zoning does have a list of allowable uses. One of those is bed and breakfast. That is owner-operated on the premises. As any planner would tell you, if it is not listed in the zoning, it is not allowed. That is end of topic. Therefore, the question has been answered. I'll point out that 2 attorneys, as Charles has mentioned, as Denise has mentioned, have reviewed our zone, and both of them, independent of each other, have concluded the same thing. Short-term rentals is not an allowable use in our zone. I find it curious that the findings from both attorneys have been forwarded to the planning department, to the county attorney, to the city manager, and the commissioners, and we have never received comment. Not one single comment about those very thought out legal arguments. The only conclusion I can make is that there is no counterpoint. They're right. Maybe by staying silent to the topic, zoning can be ignored. Furthermore, I find it puzzling why land use was not considered when creating the ordinance in the first place. I'll use an example. If I wanted to develop my land in Falcon Cove for a business, say a coffee shop, something that we could all get around, a place of meeting, a place of community, a place to start your day, I could put together a development package that made an absolutely coherent argument to put a business in. The first place it would land is on a planner's desk. We all know that that planner would say, not an allowed use, end of topic. There would be no further discussion, period. I'm a contractor in this neighborhood, in this community, in this county, and I live with land use every single day. Can I set a house back more or less than the setback limits? What's the maximum allowable height? What's the use? All of those topics come up in my daily life, and I have learned to live with them and try to respect them. So elected officials, Gail, those that are choosing to decipher through the code and the land use, I believe that you have a responsibility to enforce the hard work of those that came before us. Lots of dollars, lots of mental energy, and lots of work were put into creating land use. Land use helps us all live in a community in which we are happy to be in and works well with the intended uses of the property. Land use takes into consideration law enforcement, fire department access, septic systems, water uses, and those that came before us had a hard task of figuring out where businesses and intended uses should be placed. It is without question that CR zone does not allow short-term rentals. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Next, we'll have Linda Eierman, followed by Chris DeLong.
Good morning. I'm Linda Eierman from Arch Cape. And I know that this is intended to be mostly about the rural lands here, but I do want to make a few comments relating to Arch Cape, where the zoning does allow short-term rentals, for better or worse. I and others were really pleased to see that the options seem to imply that as Arch Cape might be allowed to keep their existing ordinance, which does apply only to Arch Cape, which is the place where there's no controversy right now that short-term rentals are allowed. It's a ordinance that was written by Arch Cape residents, and it's then was adopted by the county back in 2004, way before the rest of the county was regulated. And it's an ordinance that has worked for almost 20 years. To the extent there's problems with short-term rentals in Arch Cape, they're compliance issues. There's nothing about the law that is wrong. It's a good ordinance. And we would so appreciate if it were just left intact, and that the changes, for the most part, if there are going to be any, address the rest of the unincorporated area. There is, though, one change that I see discussed in these options that would terrifically benefit Arch Cape and actually the whole county. And that is the idea that short-term rentals become a type 2 process and that a conditional use permit be required, whether it's because they're treated as a home occupation or their own type of conditional use. The benefits would be that neighbors would get notice when a short-term rental application was filed, so before the permit was issued, and would have an opportunity to comment, and if there was controversy, have a hearing before the permit was issued. And it also would allow the county to tailor the conditions to the particular rental, because as other speakers have said, short-term rentals are not a one-size-fits-all problem. The suggestion here that conditional use permits might be required for short-term rentals with more than 6 occupants. I don't see the purpose of that distinction. Notice to neighbors and tailoring conditions seems to me to be applicable to all regardless of size. So I know that the Arch Cape Falcon Cove Beach Community Club has been advocating for conditional use permits, and that would seem to be a very desirable upgrade to our existing ordinance. But I do want to say, please leave the Arch Cape ordinance for Arch Cape. It's good, we're happy with it. And as someone else said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Next, we'll have Chris DeLong, followed by Erica and Joe.
Hi, Gail, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, I'm really late to this game. I didn't realize these meetings were going, so I watched the other videos, hopped on this call, just found out about it recently. Just for some perspective from my point of view, I have a place out in unincorporated Astoria on the back of 202 out in the woods, surrounded by 300 state acres. I've listened to all 3 hours of the meetings before and this one. It's pretty clear to me that most of these concerns are coming out of 1 or 2 pretty tight communities. They're very organized and they have, it sounds like, maybe some very legitimate concerns. I agree with many people that have spoke to say a one size fits all just is not, doesn't make a lot of sense. I certainly don't want the residents of Arch Cape or the Cove to be putting policies in place that would manage my property, nor would I want my specific needs to be managing their neighborhoods. I think if we go through with these proposed changes, I think there has to be a method of getting some exemptions, some reasonable exemptions when it makes sense for the property. So I think that's going to be very important if we're going to take a one size fits all approach. The other thing that doesn't make a lot of sense to me is everyone's concerns about turnover. I lived in my STR for 6 years. We raised 4 kids there, sports, school, activities. Now those kids have vehicles. We had chickens, roosters, dogs, and you name it. So my house as an STR is significantly quieter and a better neighbor, if you will, than when I lived there. So I don't really think in my STR that doesn't make sense to limit turnover for me. So please, when you're doing this, think about, I get it that everyone's organized somewhere, but that organization, that community, really, those rules should not apply to all. Someone in the, the woods of 202, backside of Astoria. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next, we'll hear from Erica/Joe, followed by Scott Harn.
Hello, can you guys all hear us?
Yes, we can.
All right. So Joe, Erica, and Kaya here. We have been pretty active in the early parts of this discussion, and then we had a baby and kind of have fallen off a little bit. So we appreciate the dialogue. We appreciate the opportunity to speak and have a voice. We're full-time residents of Cove Beach and are close neighbors with a lot of people that have spoken here. I think when we look at this issue, we just really want to make sure that we've got a place that we can continue to call home, that's safe, that's happy, that's healthy, and is a great place for our daughter to live and that we can raise her. So with that said, I mean, we've been involved with the North Coast Neighbors for Neighborhoods group, and we think that the testimony that Charles provided excellently speaks to our wishes. There is zoning that is put in place for a reason. We all know those reasons, and we just believe that the right thing to do is to follow the zoning that is already in place. And as a group, we are standing together as neighbors. We have elected officials that we trust are representing us properly through the proper channels, and we want to make sure that they're hearing our voices and that they're open to enacting change when it's necessary. And we believe that now is a necessary time. That's all I would have, and Erica had a couple of comments.
Yeah, I agree. We started early on following this and then had a baby, and it's been consuming a lot of our time. But now raising her here, it has become even more of an important issue because I want to be able to raise her here and feel safe and know my neighbors. And fortunately and unfortunately, we have awesome neighbors. Everybody who lives here full time, we all know each other by name. They ask how she's doing. They bring us gifts. It's a great feeling to know I'm going to be able to raise my daughter here and have wonderful people surrounding her. And even the people that have second homes that don't rent them, I feel the same way. They come, we know each other, we feel safe, and I can look to the future knowing my daughter's going to have a really wonderful place to grow up, and again, as a mama, to feel safe. We have some short-term rentals close by us that have high turnover. And that is a concern for me because when people come in on short-term rental, especially Airbnb, they're not being scanned to say what's their background. Do they have a criminal history, and that's a concern, a deep concern for me. And then like the other night, there was someone here working super late on one of the short-term rentals. It was 11 p.m. and a flashlight kept shining in our windows. And I don't know who that is, or if they have if they're safe and if I should have any concern or worry. So I called the short-term renter owner, and he's awesome. He's a wonderful man, and he's very responsive. And I would love it if he moved in full-time, I can tell you that. But it is a high turnover rental very close to us, which it just leaves a very uncomfortable feeling now, especially now having a baby girl here. That being said, another example I want to throw out there is I have a really good girlfriend, another mama friend in Seaside, and she's lived in her place raising her little girl, and she gets notice. They're going to sell it because right now we all know the market's really high. Someone wants to buy it to probably turn it into a short-term rental, and she couldn't find anywhere to live. She was going to have to move into a trailer or a camper because our prices in Clatsop County are out of control. So people who actually live here, there's not a lot of, sorry, I've got a little baby. not a lot of jobs where people can make money to afford the prices that come here, baby. The prices that now our houses are going for and rent. Come here, sorry. But anyways, okay. So that being said, I'm gonna pop off. Kaya's getting a little fussy. But I do pray and hope that that you guys take this serious, especially for residents who live here that want to raise a family, and have, I don't know.
Just make change. Now's the time. We got to set the future for where we're going. We're not going anywhere, and we want other good families to be able to raise children here and to have a great neighborhood in the community. And that's really what it comes down to.
I agree. And not live next door to businesses, and just find balance. Find balance within the short-term rental situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe and Erica. Next, we'll hear from Scott Harn, followed by Nancy Chase.
So my comment is that there appears to be some sort of a double standard with regard to commercial activity coming out of homes. I think there's a lot of sole proprietor type businesses that are being run from homes and in CR neighborhoods, and I guess we're going to have to outlaw all those too. If you think about people performing functions like maybe being a contractor or a marketing consultant or maybe a tax preparer or a so-called financial advisor, architect. I mean, I could even sell t-shirts or do e-commerce out of my house. And apparently in the tax code from the IRS, it sort of rewards this behavior. You can take deductions for using your home. People are doing it, but we seem to be drawing a line around one other type of activity, is just using an STR. So just something to think about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Next, Nancy Chase.
Thank you. I just want to kind of give a historical perspective that Cove Beach was, is really a part-time owner rental area. For ages, I've had my short-term rental for 30 years. And I think for the majority of the folks that have spoken against having quote unquote commercial activity, these STRs were here when they looked at their property, when they did their due diligence, when they decided to buy. And I am sympathetic with some of the issues that were raised, but those could easily be problems with full-time residents. Worse yet, they own the property and are never going to leave, or with renters who you don't get, full-time renters that you don't get along with. So I don't think it's really, especially when you look at the few complaints that have been there, and that most of it, that I think all of us are tied in now into the good neighbor policy. I don't think this should be on the shoulders of short-term rentals. And I would just say, especially for those who have short-term rentals next door or nearby, weren't they there when you purchased the property and when you decided to live in the Cove, which is, to me, a very special place? Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Next, we'll hear from Jonathan Felix Lund, followed by Jeff and Denise Davis, who are going to be helping Joanne Cornelius out. So, Jonathan.
Thank you, Gail. There's a lot of great comments, and I feel like it's going to be hard for me to keep my comments here organized, but I'm going to do my best and try to keep it brief. But, I think I hear about all this, and I think all the energy that's going into having kind of a black or white issue or solution to this issue, if that was put into actually, workable solutions within the community, I just feel like we'd have such a better result, because like everyone has said, there's not a one size fits all solution here. Yeah, you could have a house and have no neighbors, and you might be, subject to the same short-term rental ordinance. And a lot of these are their complaints of preference, and I couldn't agree more with Jason, who said that, these are very subjective, and people have subjective desires about how they would like to live in their home, how they would like to live in their neighborhood. And I think it really does come down to a property rights issue. And I think in this whole discussion, I don't find the zoning issue quite as compelling, but from a property rights perspective, you have the right to rent your house, where there's long-term and there's short-term. And, for my house, at least, and I can't speak to everyone, and I would love to see more data-driven solutions and more data-driven kind of reasonings behind what we're trying to accomplish here. But, I pulled the last year of an average everything out, and there's under 5 guests per stay as an average stay, and it's under half the time that we're renting out if we're not using it or having our friends go to our house. And so that's very consistent from my mind, and I'm not a lawyer, but in terms of a single family use. And then everything else beyond that seems like a safety issue. Yeah, we don't want safety issues happening. We don't want to overburden our systems. And those are very simple things to fix. They're not issues to demonize someone over. They're not issues that would require you to never be able to rent your home again. It's a fix that has to happen, right? And it's a fix that has to happen with some very objective measures if there's an actual issue. But in my situation, I had a lot of people coming after me because there was a septic issue at once, and this was like right as I was purchasing the home, so it's not something I knew about. And there was a failure in how it was installed, and then it was resolved, and it was inspected twice with no issues. And I still have rumors circulating about how, man, there's some terrible house that's causing septic issues. And as far as I could tell, like poring over all this information, it's the only septic issue I found, over the last 3 years of complaints. And I looked through everything. I mean, I really dug deep. And I think that it comes back to this subjective standard. People have a desire for how they'd like their neighborhood to look, and they're taking kind of a evolving argument. It was COVID for a while, it was septic, it's water use, it's zoning. And the reality is there's one goal, and it's to not have short-term rentals or to severely curb them. But I think that that's not consistent with single family use. And I'll kind of move into how it feels for me, because I try to be as objective as possible, and I love to have data-driven solutions. But how it really feels is that there's a group of people that they found their place. Maybe they've retired in the area and they love this area, and they've made their money, and now they want to have a peaceful life, right? But other people have a right to buy property, and other people have a right to be a part of this neighborhood in different ways. And it feels a bit frustrating there. And there's a life cycle to all of these things, right? Someone talked about their kids growing up and using the home differently. Well, I have 2 little girls, and that was a big part of why I wanted to buy this home and have them grow up at the coast, because I grew up there, because my grandpa had a house at the coast in Walport, and I went there my whole life. And it's a really special thing for me, and I primarily did it for my girls. But there's a lot of us that are working families that offsetting the cost of a home is what makes it possible for us. And it also makes it hard for those of us that are doing that to make all these meetings that are during the middle of the week. And so this one on Saturdays is the only one that I've been able to make of the last 3. And I think we need to be a little bit more inclusive. We need to look at property rights. We need a bigger discussion, and it probably has to be on a statewide level, which makes this issue so challenging. Is it a legal use to use your home? And we're not going to be able to figure that out for the whole state and for the whole country. But one thing that is very, kind of feels very true for me is these areas have been vacation areas for a long time. And, to try to get rid of this on a zoning argument, and so there's no, families can't find a house on the coast. Meanwhile, in 2003, we started pushing tourism to the coast. It's a $2.2 billion economy on the Oregon coast, second only to Portland. We're investing $3.2 million as a state into driving visitors to the coast. And there's a lot of issues that brings up, right? But short-term rentals certainly are not the cause of all these problems. They're not the cause of rising property values. They might influence it in some capacity, but this is happening all over the world. These are bigger macroeconomic issues. So, what I'd really love to see is sensible solutions that work to bring the community together and don't, allow kind of policies to be weaponized. And if we can do that, and we can start working together more than working against neighbors, I do think there's a massive amount of opportunity in what we could solve from these quality of life issues. I'm open to all kinds of changes. And when we purchased our home, I made a lot of those changes voluntarily, and it's had a massive impact. And I can show you the data because I collect it all. I'd be happy to talk to anyone, and I'd be happy to work out solutions with anyone. But I haven't necessarily found that open dialogue to be available or there to be interest with those that don't want short-term rentals in the area. So I appreciate this process. And Gail, I appreciate you and your team. I've spent a lot of time talking to the county enforcement team because I've had a lot of complaints, and a lot of them are incredibly silly. And I think we need to also trust that team, because you can't create a rule that's going to fit all these scenarios. And that team still needs to have the ability to determine, what's happening and what the right solution is. It's not always a violation. Sometimes it is a violation. And if we neuter that team, we make these rules so strict, then we're just going to end up in a really tough spot and people are going to be really upset. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next, we'll hear from Jeff and Denise Davis, who will be reading Joanne Cornelius's comments, and that will be followed by Rob Chambers.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Super. So Joanne Cornelius wrote this, and so I'll be reading this on her behalf. It is obvious to me that you, from the very beginning, have dictated to, or certainly approved of, the Planning Department's determination of the 4 changes in the STR ordinance that would be, quote, off the table, even though our particular community has a completely different makeup and percentage of STRs than even the cities in Clatsop County. The town hall meetings that have been occurring seem to be a facade to get through your process, even though STRs are illegal commercial activities in our CR zone. I'm speaking from my interest in the community that includes both Clatsop and Tillamook counties. In our case, this zoning issue affects both counties and means that we in Cove Beach and Falcon Cove have to double our efforts when counties make decisions that create the problems we locally have faced. The following are, quote, off the table items that I see. Number 1, no blanket STR prohibitions. We could and probably will end up with a community of nothing but STRs based on the way things have gone the last 7 or more years. Every time a house has sold, the buyer turns it into an STR. That a community does not make. It makes a commercial unregulated vacation playground. Remember that the local fire department reported that 80% of service calls were made by people who don't live here. Who would do the volunteering and where would they live? Number 2, no grandfathering out. Since this is a CR zone, the 70 or more percent of homeowners and residents here in Cove Beach and Falcon Cove signed a petition to have no STRs. It is democratic to consider phasing out the number of STRs. Preconditions set do not make for democratic negotiations. Number 3, one ordinance for the whole county. When this community sits on a thin layer of soil on top of clay, while your other examples sit on sand and only Gerhardt has septic systems besides us, it doesn't make sense not to make different rules for different conditions. It would be unconscionable to overlook the geology in Cove Beach and Falcon Cove. Review the complaints regarding odors from failing septic systems, applications for adding riprap to protect homes, failed septic systems, adding holding tanks to owners' property. Many of the Southwest Clatsop County members who live in Cove Beach are members of the Arch Cape Falcon Cove Beach Community Club. Even though Arch Cape has a large number of STRs and has a community water and sewer district, the community club's thoughtful letter supporting the moratorium so that positive changes could be made to the STR ordinance will be ignored because of the stand being taken by Clatsop County regarding the, quote, off the table issues. Number 4, no limit on a number of times an STR can be rented. Here again, we sit on clay. Water doesn't permeate through clay like it does through sand. STRs with no limits on turnover means many more gallons of water used in the process of preparing for new renters. Clatsop County's own septic system rules require that, quote, capacities for commercial facilities are determined on the water use basis, generally a minimum of 2 times the projected daily sewage flow, end of quote. Who is following up on checking water use of septic systems at STRs? No one. Now, with the new proposal from the Planning Department, we are to focus on 6 zoning or licensing options. The only option that should apply to Cove Beach is number 3 because of the makeup of the geology. And here, the planning department neglected to mention that some of the uses already allowed are type 2, meaning neighbors could be involved in commenting if someone applied for any of these conditional uses, like RV parks, bed and breakfast places, etc. There is a reason we are in a CR zone. This is where density of development that requires more than the very basic level of services just isn't available. Please note this. Just because some opportunistic developers 60 or 70 years ago who purchased the property in Cove Beach and Falcon Cove for unpaid taxes and then put a subdivision map over the whole area without considering the capacity doesn't mean that the counties should force this small rural community into urbanization that is unobtainable based on its geology, committed roads, and inability to expand. You profess to be concerned about housing shortages. Do all the hotels, motels, condominiums, campgrounds fill up to the point that Clatsop County needs revenue from 23 STRs in Cove Beach? Since Clatsop County doesn't keep track of transient rental tax by type of rental units, how does one know what percentage of the income could possibly come back to help with the unimproved roads in Cove Beach? So far, not much. Although last summer a road crew of 4 came to Columbia Street, which is half owned by Tillamook County, to clean out 2 or 3 culverts that hadn't been cleaned in over 20 years. But they couldn't clear a culvert that was plugged because it was on unimproved road. I ran into our commissioner's husband on the beach a couple of Sundays ago, and I hope he shared with her the latest landslides, if he noticed them. Most of the ocean end of Columbia Street fell 10 feet into the creek flowing to the beach last week. Maybe the road department should come again and resurvey what was surveyed last summer for whatever reason. There is no question that with the global warming, heavy winter rains, and added septic system use, we're having increases in landslides. I appreciate that the commissioners at least decided on a moratorium and hope that all this time and effort will bring improvement to our community. My hope is that someone listens to those of us concerned for Cove Beach and Falcon Cove, full-time residents, which number, say, 30 to 39, voters, contributors, taxpayers, yes, even those of us in Tillamook County pay taxes to Cannon Beach Fire Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise and Joanne. Next, we'll hear from Rob Chambers, followed by Micah Mastrandrea.
Thank you, Gail. I understand that there are issues that need to be addressed. I'd like to see an open process where we can submit specific issues with as much detail as possible so we can all ensure that we're addressing the actual problems. I seem to hear in many of the calls that we've had, we're talking too much in generality and we're not talking enough in specifics. I do applaud the efforts trying to make the ordinance specific with measurable, actionable details. I'd like us to, in these proceedings, it'd be great to get a little more detail oriented as well. And when people are talking, for example, if it's parked cars, okay, let's deal with the parked car issues, both for STR, guests, day trippers, permanent residents. If it's septic systems, okay, let's deal with that specifically for both STRs and permanent residents. If there are more STRs now, and if it continues to 90%, that'll be a problem. Okay, let's deal with that. Maybe like Seaside did with more sophisticated rules, limiting STRs with both a macro view and a micro view. For example, overall density caps or density caps per certain area distances, 200 feet, 300 feet, whatever. As I had said on a previous call, I really would like to focus on how do we enable STRs correctly and effectively to be a good balance with the community versus how do we get rid of them. If we focus on how do we work together to enable something, we can find out how to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Next is Micah.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to just comment. I feel like I have a reasonably unique perspective because I am born and raised in Arch Cape, and am now an adult, choosing to raise a family here, and I have a short-term rental permit out. The reason our family has decided to have a short-term rental is to supplement income and make it an affordable place for our family to live and thrive. Growing up here, the neighborhood I grew up in was surrounded by short-term rentals. I'm 34 years old, and throughout my life, my opinion of Arch Cape is that, in the summer times, families come, they enjoy their time, and it actually has added to the feeling of my community and the feeling of place. I look forward to certain families coming every year. I have lifetime relationships with some of these people. So I think just making a point that the perspective of, that these short-term rentals are just taking and taking from the community, from my personal experience in a lifetime here, is just kind of wrong. I also, in the young families I know who do live in this environment, most are builders, landscapers, house cleaners. So they're really, these short-term rentals are actually also providing a space for local families, local young families who are needing to work, an income. So it's not just an outside wealthy family taking money and running with it. There's a community element to the fact that Arch Cape does have short-term rentals. And I've seen that throughout my life, and I'm experiencing it now. So yeah, I just wanted to comment to that. Was there anything else, Chris, you wanted to? So yeah, that was all. I appreciate short-term rentals. I've enjoyed them in my life here, and I hope that it can remain. I have chosen Arch Cape because I do love the community here, and I have always felt that there is a strong community, and I'd like for it to remain. And I feel like if we take away the ability to short-term rent, we're all taking away the ability for younger families to have the opportunity to move in and make it work. So yeah, I hope that everything can stay the same and that young families can continue to move into this space and make it their home. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, that was the last speaker that I had noted had wanted to speak. Is there anyone else who wanted to provide any more comments? I know we're a little bit over our meeting time. Okay.
Well, could I speak?
Yeah, I'm getting to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Thompson for some closing remarks and thoughts.
Thank you kindly.
It does look like there was one final person that wanted to speak on the call. Amber, would we have time for her to speak?
Yes, please go ahead, Amber.
Thank you, Gail. I appreciate that. First of all, I just want to say how much I appreciate hearing all of the comments, and I'm really grateful for the ability to have a community moderated forum for this discussion. And what I'd like to highlight is that I am deeply concerned that there is an overarching tone by the full-time residents that short-term renters are innately dangerous or bad or evil. It's fascinating to me because short-term residents are just like all of us. And this alarms me because not only did many of the full-time owners actually stay in the Cove the first time as short-term renters, but in fact, quite a few of the homeowners that spoke today actually bought their properties with the intention of short-term renting their homes and even did for a while. So I really want to highlight the exclusion that is being normalized here by full-time residents. This area is, yes, both a residential area, but it also is an area that provides access to the beaches that Governor Oswald West made public for a reason so long ago. STRs assist that use. And this coastal area is for all Oregonians, not just the few white full-time residents that can afford it. Please consider why short-term residents are being considered bad, quote unquote. They are humans just like all of us. And in fact, many of us are probably also short-term residents in cities and other countries when we visit. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I've had a few more requests to speak. So next will be Jeff Davis, followed by Susan Paduano.
Hi, thanks, Gail. We just wanted to comment on Amber's letter that she submitted to the commissioners that expanded on her comments just now. The idea of exclusion is sort of a weak point, we feel, because how can you argue that limiting STRs to non-residential zones excludes those who cannot afford to live here when most of the STRs charge what is beyond the means of most people in Oregon? Denise did a quick check yesterday on Airbnb and VRBO of the 6 STRs nearest our home, north of Cedar Creek, and found that the average cost of a 3-night stay on a winter's non-holiday weekend was about $2,100. And the price goes up exponentially on holidays and in the summer. Do such high rental rates increase access to the coast? Well, we understand that not all STRs charge this much. This says a lot about the barriers that STRs actually create in our neck of the woods. And we were surprised and offended by the insinuation that our purpose in wanting our neighborhood free of STRs is motivated by racism. This is a cheap shot, misleading and patently false. We welcome people of color here as long-term residents, as neighbors, as friends. If you want to fight the cause of racism, work towards changing the culture that keeps people from earning enough to be able to live here. Or argue for the use of homestays instead of STRs, as communities like Astoria have done, and charge far less to actually ensure access for those who can't afford $2,100 for a 3-night winter stay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And next is Susan. Susan, you're off mute, but we're not hearing you. Okay. So we're still not hearing Susan. So I am going to go ahead. Is there anybody else? Okay, so seeing none, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. I appreciate ending on the point of what I'm going to call ecologically sustainable economic development. When the County Board of Commissioners, only a week or so ago, had our strategic planning meeting, every single commissioner was interested in that because we know that's a foundational issue in closing the gap between the cost of housing and what people can afford to pay. So I appreciate that. And we are paying attention to all of this. Things are in process. Things have been in process with the county. Nobody's being ignored. It's in a process. Just for the record, so you know that. What I heard today, and this is my perception, only mine, the intersection of individual preference, human relationships, property rights, public health and safety. Individual preference, human relationships, property rights, public health and safety. I think it's exacerbated by population increase. There are more and more people in Oregon. There's a growing gap between rich and poor. COVID has had incredible effects on everybody and every business and every organization. I'd also point out Orca's advertising dollars and the fact that the law says we have to use those advertising dollars as a major portion of the transient occupancy tax. So the population increase, the advertising, COVID, and the growing gap between rich and poor, those are all parts of what's going on. And yes, indeed, the impact of global climate change. So the question is, for me, going away as a commissioner, what level of public service, under what legal authority, at whose cost? Neighbors, I want to empower us to do the best with and for each other. Whatever role we have, whatever vote of the people is taken to make solid public policy choices going forward, to use our time, our energy, our talents, our money most productively to produce, I'm going to call it a thriving neighborhood in a thriving county, in a thriving state, because I think that's a common value we all share, even if we would have differences of opinion on the values. Thank you for indulging me. Thank you for coming today.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Thompson. So as we wrap up here, just a couple of items about where we're going. First of all, I'll post all of our comments, chat box comments. Those will be posted on the website today, along with a video of today's meeting. That won't get posted till Monday, but I will get that up there. Following today's meeting on January 26th, which is next Wednesday at 5 p.m., the Board of Commissioners will be looking at the zoning item discussions and the recommendations for the revisions to the short-term rental ordinances. And I did post a link in the chat box for that as well. It's on the county's calendar. If you go to January 26th and click on the board meeting, you'll see the agenda package. And then depending upon the outcome of that work session and what the board directs staff to do at that work session, then tentatively we have scheduled an ordinance first public hearing for February 9th for changes to the short-term rental ordinance, with the second public hearing on February 23rd. Typically, the board does not accept public comment at the work sessions, but both February 9th and the 23rd would be public hearings where you would have the opportunity to speak. So that concludes our meeting today. I realize we went over, and I appreciate everyone's comments and your time and your extra time today, because it is a beautiful afternoon and I am going to go enjoy it, and I hope that you all do too. So thank you very much, everyone.